This house in Snohomish, Washington is listed at $740,000, and we're going to be talking about what it would look like to buy this house. Specifically, we'll look at what your monthly payment might look like, how much cash you'll need to bring all in, that's your down payment, and any closing costs on top of your down payment. And then we'll also talk about how much income it would take in order to qualify for the loan. So we'll look at two different scenarios with two different down payments. And for both of these, I am assuming that you are probably not a first-time home buyer. You probably own a home currently that you're planning on selling, that you have some equity in to bring into the deal. So you have a good amount of cash to bring to the deal. Specifically, we'll look at one where you have about $200,000 to bring to the deal, and one scenario, one quote where you have closer to $400,000 to bring to the deal. So you're probably selling a house that you have some equity in. And we'll look at real quotes for each of these so you can walk through the numbers on that. We are a local mortgage broker. My name is Landon Buta. I work with Cleveland Street Mortgage, and this is a real quote that we've pulled showing real pricing. It's not an advertisement. These aren't exact numbers. It's not the exact interest rate you're going to end up with, but it should give you a good idea of what your numbers might look like and a little bit of the reasoning behind it. If they might look different, what could you expect? Hopefully it's a little bit more accurate than you might be able to find on an online mortgage calculator. So let's go ahead and look at this quote. All right, so here are the numbers, and before we get into what the actual numbers are on the quote, there's a few assumptions behind the quote that I had to make coming in. So one of those is that your credit score is 740. The other assumption I'm making is that you are not a first-time home buyer. That will obviously just impact your overall profile, but specifically, if you are a first-time home buyer, you qualify for certain programs. You're able to get into certain programs that sometimes offer better pricing, but we're not using those specific programs here. So there's two different quotes here. We're going to walk through one that is 50% down, and so this is the loan to value. So it's the flip side of the down payment. So this one is 25% down. So let's start with the 25% down scenario, and you can see up front that your monthly payment is $4,484. So that monthly payment is made of three different components. One of those is your homeowner's insurance, and this house is priced at $740. So homeowner's insurance of $150 is probably a pretty good estimate. It could be a little bit higher than that. I might have estimated a little bit higher on that. It's somewhere in the middle here. But your homeowner's insurance is going to depend. There's no exact number here. That's going to depend on who your provider is and just how much you're getting covered. That can vary a lot, but this is a pretty good estimate. This is the taxes, and I actually pulled that from the county website, so it's the exact number on this house for 2024, $548 per month. And then the last section is just principal and interest, and that is just a function of your loan amount, which is $555,000, and your interest rate, which is 7.25. And I'm making this here at the start in early April. So we were slightly lower last week. We're up again slightly this week, at least at the start of the week. Who knows where we'll be by the end of the week. But probably in this range is a good expectation for the start of April. And again, that depends on a lot of things, but this is generally where we're at. Definitely high sixes, maybe low sevens. And then, so this section is something I want to point out here. This section is points or credit. And technically, there's a credit of $11 here. And the way that works is just that points are a fee you can pay up front to get a lower interest rate. You pay an upfront cost, a lump sum, in order to lock in a lower interest rate. And credit is the reverse of that, where you tell the lender, I will take a higher interest rate if you cover some of my closing costs. So technically there's a credit of $11 here. The reason it's not zero is because lenders price they have a rate sheet any given day, and that rate sheet just goes incrementally along certain interest rates, and they just show what it would cost either in terms of credit or points to get that rate. And so typically for quotes like this, you're not going to see $0 with any lender. but that's as close as it gets, basically, to zero. And then, so we got an interest rate of 7.25 with no points, and all that resulted in that monthly payment. Closing costs is $13,476. Closing costs are you have to pay closing costs involved in order to get your house and get your mortgage, and this is just an estimate, but it's probably a pretty good estimate for what you're going to be looking at this price point. It's a function of the price point, it's a function of the loan amount, it's also a function of like just when you buy the house, how early in the month you buy the house, and at what point in the year you buy the house, because included in closing costs are obviously the costs you have to pay in order to get the mortgage, but then also other costs there's another section called prepaids, and that's just those are costs that you're going to be paying on an ongoing basis with your mortgage, prepaids, but in order to get set up, in order to get established in the loan, you have to put some of those into escrow ahead of time, and you have to pay those as closing costs. So then the closing cost plus the down payment, the closing cost plus the down payment is just under $200,000, $199,586 for this 25% down scenario. And again, that's a pretty good chunk of cash, and so probably, maybe you just have that you can bring to the deal. Probably you are selling a house that you have some equity in and coming over to this house. In 25% down, if you're thinking through 25% versus 20%, a lot of times 25% hitting that 25% point can improve your pricing, can get you a better interest rate than just 20% down. Obviously, 20% down, you knock off mortgage insurance, so that's an important threshold. But if you can get to 25% as well, typically your interest rate improves a little bit beyond what you would get at 20%. So I'll come back and talk about what it would take to qualify for this loan in a second, but let's walk through the second scenario, and then we'll talk about qualifying. How much income would it take to qualify for both together? So monthly payment on this, and this is the 50% down scenario. The monthly payment on this is $3,159, significantly lower, obviously. And homeowners insurance and taxes are both going to be the same. Those are dependent on the house. They're not dependent on the loan structure. Principal and interest is the last section, $2,461. And that's a function of your loan amount. It's a much smaller loan amount, $370,000. And now we have a lower interest rate because we were able to bring a much larger down payment. And that shows the lender there's less risk, and gets you, and it's just a smaller loan amount. And so we were able to improve the interest rate by about a quarter point there. No points again, $122 in credit. Again, so just for context, this number could be in points, it could be $20,000, $25,000. It could be a very, very high number, and usually it takes several $1,000s to impact the interest rate significantly. How much a point costs, it varies at different times in the market. So sometimes you can do some more, you can have a bigger impact with a smaller amount of points or credit, but typically it's going to take a few $1,000s at least to have any sort of impact on the interest rate. So $122 is, again, yes, it's not nothing, it's $122, but as far as having an impact on the interest rate in terms of what it actually means to pay points, this is pretty close to zero. And then in this case, $12,422, and that is lower just because it's a smaller loan amount. This price point, these numbers are probably a pretty good expectation. Generally, we probably budget, just doing the mental math ahead of time, probably $11,000 or $12,000 in closing costs, just as a number we kind of throw out there to think through. But it is consistently, especially at this price point, getting up closer to 12, 13, 14, 15 sometimes. So that can vary, but it's probably going to be $11,000 to $15,000 range if you're in this price point or higher. Okay, so what that means is closing costs plus your down payment all together, all the cash you're going to have to bring to get this deal done is $383,532. Again, probably selling a house, maybe you just have that cash liquid and you're able to buy it. Maybe you're a first-time home buyer, I don't know. But probably if you're looking at this house, if you're looking at this, bringing this much cash, you have some equity in another house that you are selling. So how much income would it take to qualify for these two loan scenarios? Could you qualify for this loan? Obviously, just looking at it right away, you could probably have a sense of whether you would want to take that on, whether you could afford that, and that's a question you have to answer. That's a budgeting question, and so that's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is if you come to the lender with X amount of income, would they let you give this? Would they give you this loan? Would they let you take it on? So the way that lenders determine whether you can qualify for a loan is they look at your debt to income ratio. And your debt to income ratio, sorry, this is a D, not a P. Your debt to income ratio is your total monthly debt over your gross monthly income. And that's how they determine it for both conventional and FHA, which we're only looking at conventional here, but that is the calculation used for conventional and FHA. Now the number that they will use is slightly different for those two. But I say that because VA is significantly different. The way they calculate qualifying for VA is very different. So this wouldn't apply there. But your debt to income ratio for conventional needs to be less than 50%. If it's less than 50%, they will let you take the loan on for the most part. That's a pretty good rule. With the FHA, it's very close to 50%. It's very similar. It's a slight nuance that I'm not going to get into right here. But so they take your total monthly debts, which is your new housing payment that you're trying to take on, plus any other monthly debts you have, credit card, student loan, car, and they add that all together and then divide it by your gross monthly income, which is your income before taxes. And if that number is less than 50%, then you are good to go. The number that they use here, though, can be sometimes slightly different or very different from what you have in your head. If you are making salary, it's usually pretty straightforward, and they just use that number here. Whatever you're making in salary, they can use that here. So that's usually pretty straightforward, depending on how long you've been at the company and how long you've had that pay, things like that. But if your salary, it's usually this number. You can plug that in here. If you're making other income types, if you have other pay structures, like commission, or if you make a lot of bonus, or if you are self-employed, or you work variable hours, if any of those things apply, then there are pretty rigid rules that the lenders have to adhere to in order to determine what number they can use down here for you. So they look at your pay stubs, they look at your tax forms, and over the last few years, they look at how long you've been that company in that role, making that amount of money, and they figure out what number they're going to use down here. So it's usually not super intuitive. If you want to get a good idea on that, you pretty much just have to talk to a lender. If you have questions on that, you can just leave those in the comments, and I'll try and get to those. But best case scenario, you'll just have a lender look at, or a loan officer look at your own income. So if we take this rule and we assume you have no other debts, could you qualify for these two loans? Basically, in this scenario, you can do the math. Let's see if I can do the math. If your total monthly payment and you have no other debts has to be less than 50% of your gross monthly income, then in this scenario, you'd have to be making, what is that, $8,800, $8,968 per month. Let's see if I got that right. That's right. So $8,968 per month, which let's see what that is per year. So per year, that's $107,616 in order to qualify for this loan. Again, this is not a budgeting rule. You can figure out what you want to do as far as budgeting, affordability, how much you want to take on. But in order for the lender to give you this loan, you would have to be making $107,000, a little over $107,000 per year. This other scenario here, 50% down for a $3,159 monthly payment, you would have to be making $6,318 per month. Let's check. Okay, that is right. And per year, that's $75,816. Okay, so obviously much smaller monthly payment in order to qualify for this. The required income is much lower. So I hope that's helpful to give you a sense of, you're looking at this house, you're looking at houses in this price point. What would your numbers look like? What would your monthly payment possibly look like right now in the spring of 2024 if you're taking that on? And how much cash would you need to bring? How much income would you need to be making for that scenario? If you want to get a look at your specific numbers, a real quote on a house that you are looking at, feel free to reach out. All our contact info is in the description. We are based in Bothell, Washington. We do loans in Washington and Idaho. And I work closely with my dad. He's been doing this for almost 30 years and just super experienced in this industry. You can check out our website, see what kind of reviews we have. But we love to work with you. We love taking on new loans, so please do reach out. Check out the contact information in the description below.